what the U.S. producer can do is incredible. We need to build that back up. We need to make consumers want U.S. produced goods. And when those markets open up, again, 100 out of 99 times, a farmer will chase what is economically beneficial for them. And not only does that market have to be there has to be a scale to serve that market. Well, we have a lot of farmers who would probably willing to serve the market, if they were there, if they were beautiful, I mean, and they can be there. We need to cater to them a little bit more. We need to help the consumer understand that what's happening here is great.
The AgEmerge podcast is brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. I'm your host, Monty Botten. Join me as leaders in soil health, research, and ag tech share their perspectives and enable you to farm outside the box. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the AgEmerge podcast. We're glad that you could join us today. One of the things that I hear constantly from regenerative farmers is, man, I really wish we could have better risk assurances, better insurance coverage, and things that I hear from regenerative agriculture leaders is the crop insurance program that we have today is driving us to stay in conventional farming the way that we always have. It's one of the number one impediments. So lo and behold, we have a guest with us today that's going to address some of these challenges that we're dealing with. I'd like to welcome Eric Gibson with Rabobank. How are you doing, Eric?
I'm doing great today. Perfect weather and a wonderful day to be chatting with you.
Well, Eric, you've put together currently, I believe it's a draft. Maybe you've released it now, but some really good information of thinking about just what are all the implications as we switch to regenerative agriculture and what that can mean. But first, just take a moment, tell us your story, introduce yourself and your background, and help our listeners understand your role in farming.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in eastern Missouri. I grew up about an hour and a half northwest of St. Louis on a small beef and row crop operation, still very much at the heart of it. Slightly involved today, would like to be a bit more involved as my wife and I venture in that direction. Our children, after we're raising these crops in our household now, we kind of dive into that next journey. But yeah, agriculture is me. That's what I am. It's what I've always known. It's what I studied in school, and every job or whatnot I've had since then has just revolved around supporting our farmers and ranchers. I mean, we've got the most critical tools, right around us. We have farmers that know what they're doing. So whatever I can do to support them has always been top of mind. But yeah, we're here today. We're talking about ways that we can improve what farmers have. And that's a mission of mine, there's a lot of barriers in this industry. So what can I do to help them take that next step? And boy, those barriers seem to be getting bigger and bigger lately.
And, being from Missouri, you got to show me, you got to show me what's going on. And
Definitely.
I think what you've written out here is a great way to really, really take a look at that. So tell me about Rabobank for not, they're pretty much everywhere, but there may be a few people that don't know about Rabobank, and why would they be interested in this, regenerative agriculture, sustainability? They're a bank. What do they care?
Yeah. So Rabobank currently operates in about 35 different countries around the world in all sectors, all corners of the agri-food value chain. So from far upstream before you get to the farmer, all the way down to that rural business with the farmer and rancher, down through food manufacturers to the consumer. So we are in a position to be influential and supportive of how our industries can evolve and adapt. And, as regulatory and consumer function changes, demands change, what they're looking for is evolving on a regular basis. Rabobank seeks to be a partner for our clients, again, at all levels of the value chain, to just help them to connect the dots, get to where they need to be. And whether you're talking about climate change or economic stress, whatever it may be, Rabobank is thinking that first and foremost. And I'm really privileged to be a part of the Rabo research team. So globally, we have over 100 individuals who, just like our presence across the value chain, we've got experts plugged in to help make sure that our clients can be making informed decisions. And I think we all thoroughly enjoy what we get to do.
Well, how did we get here, right, Eric? How did we get to the point that we're at with crop insurance? And, it evolved out of, I believe, some World Trade Organization lawsuits and such. Our direct payment structure needed to go away. We had to have a workaround essentially for that, and entered crop insurance and the subsidizing the expenses, not the actuarial cost, but the expenses portion of crop insurance to make it feasible. Walk us through that history and how we got to where we are today.
Yeah, I think if you look at it really high level, you go back, 100 years. You go back to Great Depression, Dust Bowl, and in came these new agencies to help serve people, not just rural America, but urban America as all. And some of those big goals were abundant, available, sufficient, consistent supply chain of food. Because as everyone around the world realized, when we were going through what we were doing all over the world, there was struggle with food. So since then, the systems continue to adapt from food security through soil health, through innovation. And yeah, where we are today, we've got a system in place that still has those core goals: keep farmers and ranchers producing, help them to usher in what's next within their operation. And as you stated, there's been a lot of evolution in terms of how these products can support producers. And then the current crop insurance system that's in place well over a decade, even further back with some of the different products and supports, still continues to evolve. And with the structure of the Farm Bill and other agency support, I think it's critical to point out that while there are subsidization of the cost of insurance, you have an agency that's in place to help dictate where the products move, what could be changing and evolving. So we have a system in place that should be able to grow, evolve, and adapt with farmer needs. And that's a very critical piece. That was one of the things that, as I was starting this research assignment, I was thinking of. It's like, okay, the system that's in place, where is it at, considering where the industry has gone? And if you think about, commodity production, the vast majority of production in the Midwest with row crop production, even livestock, these pieces that are in place are, again, to help ensure that farmers can continue producing. And, the last 20 years, you had continuation of growing global markets. You had biofuel boom. You had a lot of things that were saying, hey, commodity markets are where we need farmers to continue ushering next level just awesomeness, for lack of better words, producing more with less. And US farmers and ranchers, when you think of efficiency in terms of sustainability, they're doing more with less all the time. So on one hand, these programs that are in place are supporting that. But as we usher in the next generation of changes, taking that next step in really tight margin environments, how can farmers and ranchers navigate that with the current system in place?
So, the current system, basically, we look at the major commodity crops. The one that's, I would say, has the most dollars of subsidies going toward it would be the commodity crops.
Yes.
And we look at the essentially a revenue protection model. Yes, there's multiple alphabet soups associated with that, ECO, SEO, you know, and everything else associated with whatever route or path that you take in crop insurance. Uh, but it boils down to, hey, we're going to take the current market price times your historical yield, and a certain percentage of that is what we're going to guarantee to where, if you come in at 80% of that and you've paid for 85%, we're going to cover that 5% difference there. And that has really just kind of it hasn't changed much, right? Since that
Right.
initial farm bill. How many iterations are we on a farm bill of
Oh,
just essentially, um,
I think
okay,
it's
we're going
I
to do
think it's
something great.
14, something like that.
Let's just hit the copy button. Okay, good enough. Move on. They talk about it for a year. Everybody gets excited, and then nothing changes. I mean, are we on like our third or fourth copy of this of
Yeah,
the current system?
since we've had the current system in place, I think we're working on draft
Nine.
number 4.
Okay, yeah,
But total farm, but I think there's been, don't quote me on this, so I guess we're being recorded. But I think it's 14 total farm bills since the inception, give or take a couple. And yeah, a lot of those programs have changed and evolved, but the current structure in place hasn't, had the same trajectory of change regarding where the industry's at.
yeah, and we've kind of, like you mentioned in there, the biofuel boom that has worked its way into the system, right? And if anything, there's with improved mileage, electrification, there's downward pressure on that.
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
now, and with current trade related type things, and part of it's back and forth tariff related things, but there's also Brazil. If you look at where they've come in the last 20 years, both in productivity and infrastructure,
Mhm.
look at Africa and how Africa and development of a lot of parts of Africa by China, and just being able to self supply more versus buying more on the market, or Chinese interaction in South America too. a lot of things have changed there to where we keep growing and get better and better, but where
Yeah.
is it going to go? And we're kind of seeing that reflected in this year's prices, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head on a number of avenues. I mean, Brazil has the potential to add 50 plus million acres of row crop production. That not only translate to more commodities grown, well, they're also expanding their beef production and other livestock. You look at where China's at, and while they may not be known for a huge production area, they do produce a lot of crop. And if they continue to innovate, somewhere around 70% of their farm ground is considered small scale, so less than 2 hectares. If they innovated a small amount of that, you're talking about a substantially more amount of crops. And then, yes, we will continue seeing a growing population. Yes, much of that population will continue developing. Um, but a large percentage of the growth is not on a large protein consuming, demographic. So what do we do with this supply? Because we're going to continue, producing more here and everywhere. If I'm a farmer, that's the question I'm asking myself on a regular basis. What markets will my son or daughter or nephew or neighbor down the road, will be there for them 10, 15, 20 years from now?
So, Eric, you've seen the same ads by large agrochemical companies that were very prevalent, I would say, at least up to 5 years ago, if not for sure 20 years ago. How are we going to feed the world that's going to be 10 billion people by 2050? And how are we going to do this? And now everybody's increasing incomes, and farmers we're up for the challenge, right? One thing we know how to do is produce, and we've done that. And I think there's some evidence now that shows that, hey, population rates aren't growing as fast as what we thought. The replacement rate and birthing rates are down in many countries, especially developed countries.
Right.
And all of a sudden, this arable farmland that we do have, there's more coming in, and it's becoming more productive. I'm not sure that 2050, we're not going to be able to feed ourselves is much of an issue, is it? Or
I wholeheartedly
that's an
agree.
opinion.
Yeah.
That's an
Right. Yeah.
opinion.
Right. Yeah. But that's
Opinion.
that's that's our trajectory. If we keep producing at this rate, the abundance of food, feed, fiber available is going to continue rising at a pretty substantial rate. Has the potential to rise at a substantial rate.
So one of the other things I find interesting, and I don't know if you know Dr. Jerry Hatfield, but he's a longtime USDA ARS researcher at the National Soil Tilth Lab at Iowa State. And I remember him quoting, and this is in the 2000s numbers. So for every pound of corn produced in the state of Iowa, tolerable soil loss is 3 pounds. So you take, the tons of soil loss
Sure.
of 3 tons per acre, divided by the bushels raised. So we're losing a pound of soil or we're losing 3 pounds of soil for every pound of food that we create, or livestock feed
Sure.
that we create. You know, if we do that, and it seems like a lot of times higher production systems require more intensive tillage, more nutrient input in general, there comes a point where the soil just doesn't stay the same for infinity, right?
Sure.
There's erosion starts to add up. There, because today we're paid for revenue is the game, right? In crop insurance, revenue is the game. So this year we want to maximize our revenue, because if we don't get paid out on crop insurance, we've increased our APH for the future to get
Sure.
paid out on crop
Right.
insurance. So, which is great on the revenue side, but that don't look at what happens 50 years from now when we've lost 150 tons, or about 5 tons per acre is the current erosion rate. We lost 250 tons per acre of our primo soil. Then what happens to that APH? Where is that disconnect, and how do we reconnect that? And that's really, I think, the heart of what you're researching here.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because we all understand, and farmers understand this too, because that soil is their most important, tool that they utilize to grow a crop. And for decades, folks have been ushering in new means of being, improving, again, back to the efficiency. They're doing much more with less, that's a big thing. But, there's often a cost. There's pros and cons, and you got to weigh those out. And I always go back to no-till, for example. That was one innovation of technology. It really took a few decades for folks to really start leveraging it. And then overnight, you started having, you know, huge increase in folks leveraging it. And, part of that was because you had different herbicide and in-season herbicide tools. So that changed that a bit. But again, the overarching argument is, what happens down the road. And unfortunately, we're always kind of the guinea pig for what tomorrow will be. Because you can research something and research something, research something, but until it's on every single acre, you don't know how it's going to change or, fluctuate. And that's one thing that farmers deal with as well. I mean, you might have better data or better tools in understanding how something performs on your ground. But again, until you actually do it, it's really hard to understand where you're at. And that's where, with the current system in place, they know where they're at because of these tools that they have, which is great. I mean, that for security perspective and economics, that makes sense for them. But if you find a sweet spot to where every year you're making money, you're hanging on to what you love, your lifestyle, your legacy, why would you deviate away from that? So when the current tools in place may not allow for even some of the smaller incremental changes at times, I mean, I'm a huge fan of cover crops. They're, I think, one of the greatest tool that you could be utilizing, but it's not always easy to implement. And we see that. USDA in their recent survey acknowledged about a percent reduction in overall cover crop utilization because when nutrients and inputs get expensive, when the rain's not falling, or when it's too much, how are you going to utilize that? So farmers have to have a chance to try these things out on their operation. So having tools that allow them to do that's big. Well, as you're probably aware, there are certain zones within crop insurance policies to where, hey, you have to terminate your cover crop by a certain date. Well, that kind of takes away a lot of capacity for tools. In some areas, you have to terminate 15 days before planting. Well, if it rains for 3 weeks after that, your cover crop as a tool, you may have organic matter, you may have, a lot, it may have kept the soil intact and in place during the off season, but weeds are coming up during those 3 or 4 weeks you're out. So, I mean, they eh, better means of supporting, the next generation, ushering those next tools that they want to use. That's needed significantly. And farmers far and wide say that they would welcome it. Not all, some may not openly say it, but anytime that a farmer has the freedom to make their own decisions, I think they're pretty much open to that, so long as there's, a value opportunity for them.
So you surveyed, interviewed a lot of farmers to kind of get a feel for, how can we make essentially, risk management align with regenerative ag practices. Talk to us about some of the feedback that you thought was interesting and some recurring themes, and first off, identify what are the problems that you discovered, and then after that we'll go into, okay, now what do we do to provide solutions to those problems.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem that shouldn't be a surprise to all is that sustainability, while the term in its own can be very powerful, there's so much disconnect from the downstream, particularly in terms of what it means to them. And it very frequently does not align.
Define downstream for
So,
everyone. You're saying
downstream, yes. So
for
your
consumers of,
consumers, your
okay.
your food manufacturers, and I mean you could even throw regulators in that function. And when you're talking about food safety and consumer trends, uh, so these individuals, if they don't fully align with where farmers are at, or just may not even be seeking to understand, not always that they don't want to, but they may not have the ability to fully understand it. There's so much disconnect, and you know farmers and ranchers frequently are expected to do miracle work overnight, just turn on a dime. So, the biggest takeaway was this is a struggle. A lot of them hate the term sustainability, which is unfortunate because everyone is implementing sustainability in their business or whatever. If they want to be here tomorrow, they are seeking sustainability, and in one way or the other. So there's a lot of disconnect that we have to continue combating. Some of the other biggest takeaways was the influence that digital technology has on ushering in new opportunities. From an on-farm trialing perspective, knowing where you're at is first and foremost the best way you can improve tomorrow. One of my favorite quotes is, "What you can measure, you can improve." So farmers now have the ability to more, what's the phrase? I just say more easily implement a lot of things in their operation because they know where they're at, and then they can better measure the outcomes. So a lot of, and again, it shouldn't surprise, technology helps us in every aspect of our life today. So, the digital data connection is a big deal. And then, of course, larger producers, for the most part, are the ones investing in these tools. So, a lot of these sustainable regenerative practices, a lot of the larger farmers are starting to scale them at a different pace than some of the smaller farmers. And it's not because no one wants to, But when you can understand it, when you can make sense of your investments, those decisions go a lot further.
So one of the things you dial in on in your report is essentially, let's look at nitrogen use rates. So one of the soil health principles is minimizing soil disturbance,
Sure.
which not only is a tillage related thing, like you said, you're an advocate of no-till, so am I, but it's also a input related thing. So how much are we disturbing the soil system to produce a crop? So more inputs, is more disturbance. I have a funny little thing. I say it's us being more ons, right? So more on is we're always taught is better, and I like to encourage people to not be a moron. So
Mhm.
anyway, when you look at the nitrogen type system, the current recommendation here, and I think this is not just the grand state of the University of Illinois, but the minimum return to nitrogen concept, or the economic optimum nitrogen rate, I believe is what Iowa uses. Everyone's got some 4-letter acronym
Sure.
for it. But let's say we'll use today's numbers. Let's say a unit of nitrogen's 80 cents, okay, which is ridiculous. Let's say it's 80 cents and a bushel of corn is $4, just for round math. So it would say that you can put on 5 units of nitrogen to get that very last bushel of corn. Okay, so if I put on 250 units of nitrogen to get 280 bushel corn, those equations would say you can put on 255 bushels to get 281, right?
Right.
So that last, that last 5 units of nitrogen to get the last bushel of corn, that is what the universities are saying, right? And that drives the APH for year over year to blend that 10-year average to get higher and higher revenue projections. So that's all going that way. But what if it took 5 units of nitrogen to grow every bushel?
That
Okay,
would be
so
substantial for sure.
I mean, you take 280 times 5, right? So
Right.
all of a sudden that'd be 1,400 pounds to the acre of nitrogen. Who in their right mind would put out that much nitrogen?
Well,
Like
yeah.
we wouldn't, but
Right.
that's essentially what we're doing with our current model to eke out that very last bushel is a 5-to-1 ratio. So now a person wants to be sustainable. I'm setting you up here to just hit a home run with this one, Eric. Person wants to be sustainable and they dial back their nitrogen a little bit and they take a little bit of a yield hit, or they dial it back maybe 20%, and how that affects their payment scheme and why farmers aren't doing this. And this is what's leading to water quality issues and organic matter capture and all the anti-regenerative things. Walk us through that example. I thought it was amazing.
Yeah. So, and keeping in mind, I'll address this a little bit more at the end, but the cost of inputs have kind of gone up, and that floor has gone up with it. So this is something that farmers should be considering. Where is that optimum margin opportunity for me as a producer? And it's the current system in place says yield more. If you yield more, that protection's there. Your floor for what you're going to make is not going to go below this. Which again, for being able to be a farmer tomorrow, that's great. It's fine and dandy. But yeah, when we're talking about maximizing your inputs, your optimum nitrogen use efficiency is going to be at this level. But the example you said, you're going to push it a little bit more. So one, you can drive the APH, and then if there is the situation of like maybe it's an ideal year, maybe you get perfect amount of rainfall, not oversaturated, but enough to just make that plant blossom like most of us had this year, I think applying a little bit more nitrogen may go a little bit further this year. So, the farmers have also they're chasing that big payout. So if I'm adding 5 pounds to get that extra bushel, it's paid for itself. So worst case scenario, I'm just adding too much nitrogen, which can be a problem if there's runoff or again, a potential of a really dry year where your crop's not going to fully utilize it. So if a farmer was to take a step back and say, hey, I want to just really chase and really hit home where my best production margin is, my best profit margin is, like you said, it may result in a 40 bushel less per acre production scheme, but your operating costs could go down so substantially far, which we're entering a climate, a forecast with the economic situation where that's probably pretty wise. However, we have tools in place that are saying you need to yield more. And if I'm a farmer and I'm going to be chasing a new opportunity, I'm going to try something that could scale my yield back 50 bushel an acre. Well, that's going to impact my T yields, my EPH, and that reduces the floor and ceiling for support. So again, when you go back to I want the next generation to be in good shape. I don't want to make a boneheaded decision that's going to impact them. I think it's really hard for a lot of farmers to step outside of that comfort zone because there is a lot of risk in trying something new. And then there's also the conversation when, agriculture is very peer oriented. I think before we try anything else out ourselves, we want to see what our neighbor's doing or someone down the road is doing. And I, I would bet a lot of money that you're going to remember their failures a lot more than their successes. I mean, I think that just really hits home with farmers too. Yeah, buddy down the road put in 500 acres of cover crop last year. His yields were 50 bushel off. I'm never trying it. So it's really hard to get that bad taste out of your mouth. And then you couple in where the risk support is. Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough to deviate away from a status quo or whatever prescription's working for you to make what you would consider a good return on investment.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to hammer home the point on the economic, optimum nitrogen rate or MRTN is that last 4 pounds, right, to create the last bushel is what they'd say on an economics standpoint, and we all know that we can all agree it's about 1 or 1.1 pounds of nitrogen to make a bushel. There's 2.9 that's just going to waste.
Sure.
It's going somewhere, right?
Right.
So the current system doesn't account for any of that. And what do downstream people think? And then, the consumer and those kind of things, but also the upstream. There's a lot of people interested in this from their corporate sustainability standpoints that
Absolutely.
are, nitrogen is the number one problem child when it comes to carbon and intensity scoring in corn. And I think everybody's got a lot of interest in this upstream from the farmer and downstream
Sure.
from the farmer. But I think the farmers heard about it, but don't really isn't really in the loop there on that. So talk to us a little bit about that risk factor.
Yeah, so yeah, the corporations have their goals, maybe their science-based targets, maybe it's something else that they've implemented. And yeah, GHG, one of the biggest things is scaling back on where their emission footprint is, whether it's scope 1, 2, or 3. Your scope 3 emissions are those emissions that you're not responsible for, but you have to account them in whatever product you're selling or producing. So if you're upstream or downstream from a farmer, whatever the farmer's footprint is goes against your scope 3 score. So everyone and their brother right now is trying to reduce that. Again, I don't think anyone's been trying to increase it ever. It's just there's a lot more attention on it now. But I think the hardest part for farmers to understand in all this is you're asking us to do more. You're asking us to spend a lot more money, maybe potentially to get where we're at to take on more risk. And there's just not value there. And unfortunately, we have, I don't know if I should say an unwilling consumer to pay a premium, but the majority of producers, especially in the United States, are pretty unwilling to pay a premium for a product that should be perceived as premium. I mean, farmers want markets. If they don't have markets, there's not really a decision to make.
Well, it's one thing to talk about the problems, and unless we offer solutions, then we're just complainers, right? So after this break, we're going to talk a little bit and brainstorm a little on what the future of risk protection could look like. Let's take a quick break and hear from our national sales manager at ASN, Zach Neppel.
The AgEmerge podcast is brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. At ASN, we support farmers with top quality crop nutrition products and soil health practices. Our Power to Grow system delivers tailored nutrition to boost plant health and improve soil function, ensuring higher yields and sustainable growth. From seed to harvest, trust ASN to feed your crops and your bottom line. Let's farm better together. Visit agsolutionsnetwork.com to learn more.
All right. We promised that we're going to give solutions here, Eric. So how do we solve this? What's needed in the Farm Bill? What's needed because realizing regenerative agriculture is the ultimate risk protection tool.
Absolutely.
Or soil health, we can't even agree on a term to say, right? But, improving your soil, increasing carbon, increasing water, decreasing inputs, all of those things are the ultimate sustainability, ultimate risk management tool, not insurance. Insurance exists because those things aren't functioning correctly. Nature did just fine supporting a very large bison herd and amazing, crop production prior to Europeans settling the Corn Belt, right? So, and they did it, and nature did it without crop insurance agents. It's amazing. But talk to us. What are these solutions in order to de-risk the system and to align revenue protections with de-risking?
Yeah. In my opinion, the first thing you have to do is just do a big diagnosis of these farm safety net programs. And I'm not saying, regardless of what anyone's opinion of of any of these programs or anything is, you have to create a level, equal playing field for folks that want to deviate from the norm. So, if insurance is going to be in place for commodity production, for all production, whatever it may be, your support does have to be equal. And I'm not saying the payouts have to be equal. I'm saying that your programs have to mirror, you know, what is going to keep a producer producing at this level. Again, because if you do scale back your production and you're focused on a return on investment, less inputs, you might be yielding less, your support could be here, but if you did it the old way, it still could be here. So agriculture has gotten very competitive. Rental acres are very, very high. Cost to purchase is crazy expensive. And if your risk level makes it to where you're paying $10, $15 less an acre for some farm ground, there's a good chance you could lose that. So your competitiveness it's just not on an equal playing field. So reevaluating the systems in place, probably creating some type of crop insurance product that does allow farmers to do more on-farm trialing, to do something that offsets like, hey, if Mother Nature decides to disagree with your new choice this year, it's not going to impact your APH moving forward. So looking at programs like that, just ways that we can usher in, you know, evolving from where producers are at right now. From a farm safety net perspective, that should be an evaluation.
Okay, just to help me visualize what you just said there. Let's say you're allowed to do up to a new practice that is sustainably oriented or regeneratively oriented on your farm on 10% of your acres. And if it is a failure or doesn't meet your APH, then that APH doesn't count against you in some way, is what you're suggesting?
That could absolutely be an approach. You take your APH on, maybe you can elect to, it can only adjust your APH upward, for example, something along
Okay.
the lines of that. Or a scenario where, hey, these 10 acres this year, they're just not going to influence my APH at all this year. Something along the lines of that, something that gives farmers a little bit more flexibility. I think another avenue that would need to be discussed in the farm safety net is really diversification. There are a lot of crops out there that cannot even receive crop insurance, or they cannot receive emergency disaster payments, whatever it may be. And uh, I don't know how much you pay attention to California agriculture, but some of those individuals are under a lot of stress. And that is the most important breadbasket for food production and one of the best and one of the most important in the world. And a lot of those folks are unprotected in what they're doing. And whatever risks they're encountering, that having some diversification of tools would help them a lot. I understanding a lot of them do have contracts and other support in place, but a lot of companies are getting tighter with the contracts they're actually writing as well. They're getting better at forecasting where it's at. And then again, that whole globalization front. If I'm a company and I have my multinational assets over here, if there's a really tough year where supply goes down, I can import it from a different region we function within. And so it's just getting a lot tighter for producers that are, diversified and producing specialty crops, things like that.
And I think, that is one of the three or one of the five soil health principles is diversification. And
Absolutely.
it's extraordinarily hard to participate in that because not only everything's set up for corn and soybeans here in the Corn Belt,
Right.
um, you know, it's also hard because of there's no revenue guarantees. You look at, for example, I grew triticale. I also have grown other off crops for grazing and those kind of things. And there's not I don't believe there's a grazing product for annual cover crops, right?
Sure.
There's a
Right.
grazing product for perennial grasses, but I can't go out and get that. So it's a roll of the dice and hope the rain comes and away we go.
Absolutely.
Uh, you,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yet the neighbors enjoying time off in August, getting ready to work on his combine to go to the field, right? And we're hoping for rain in order to grow a cover crop to feed cattle. What are ways that we could bring more of those into the fold? I know, currently there's a whole farm revenue protection thing, but it's just not
It's
doesn't have
lackluster, I would say,
the
is the best way
teeth,
to
if
put it.
you will. And that would be something that they've tried a little bit in California, but the percentage protection is not enough. You'll go broke before it kicks in. What are some ways that we can encourage diversity on farm?
Well, I think one of the biggest blind spots that most farmers have is with these markets that have really boomed for biofuels in China. So corn, soy, primarily innovation of those products has went up and up and up with the value, while those other products have gone at a much slower, rapid pace. So since there's that lack in innovation, the performance of a lot of different crops just doesn't get anywhere close to where corn and soybean is today. If you compare some of our recent droughts, it's like farmers can still produce a mighty great corn crop if it's a dry year. Well, 40 years ago they couldn't. If you compare that with other crops, it's like, hey, we don't have that innovative approach to, you know, I I I don't know if this number is still exact, but a couple of years ago there was 12 or 14 rye products, cereal rye products that were primarily used across the US. I know I'm sure there's more now, but that was the primary acreage. So how many corn hybrids are there? How many soybean varieties are there? Hundreds. I mean, you've got products that are specific to counties, in some instances. And so diversification is already a step back from those because it's like, hey, I just, I'm just not as far along as the corn and soy products have supplied me. So I think innovation has really got to catch up. And again, you have to have some type of support as farmers are innovating, as companies are coming on board. And you're not gonna have many more seed companies for cover crop, for example, unless there's a good market for them. At some point, the markets have to catch up to where this demand is trying to grow towards.
Uh, the what kind of impact has sometimes there's certain insurance premium discounts associated with using cover crops or no till. There's also third party, indulgences, I call them, where Pepsi or some big conglomerates paying somebody for their carbon offsets. How is that affecting this space, and how does that integrate with the revenue protection programs?
I would say the impact at this point, it's slight. It's a bit. I think most of these opportunities have primarily chased after the individuals that have already either started transitioning or already there, which makes sense. If you're going to be paying more for a product or solution, you want a higher success rate. So you're going to go with someone that understands it. So for those individuals that have gotten there already, and I applaud them when they've had really good economical years, they've invested in making changes. I think that's really critical. When times are good, you need to invest back into it. Those folks are doing well in a lot of these landscapes. And, I've spoken with many of them. I spoke with one guy last week that's got $130 more an acre because of one of his programs. And that's just absolutely monstrous, you know? So if you're there, keep chasing those opportunities. I've also realized some of these individuals get very protective with them, and rightfully slow. So if you find value, you're not going to want to let go of it. So some of these individuals may not speak at such a high a volume as they may otherwise if it, weren't a good opportunity for them. But it's going to take a collective effort across the value chain to make this work. Even if the farm safety net programs adjust, you still have to have markets.
Uh-huh.
Now, if farmers can get to a place where they're saving on inputs and they're making more money that way, that works as well. But to really move the needle, to really convince folks otherwise to move, you have to have value from elsewhere. It's got to come from the downstream at some point. So that's going to be critical. And then as far as a lot of these third party programs, we saw with the climate smart partnerships that is was moved to some other. Don't even know what the program's called today, what they were changed and rolled into. But enrollment on those was pretty slim. At one point, I think the progress was around 12% a year into them. So it was still very low. And again, when you can't address the overarching risk, if you can't connect the dots with value here or risk support here, if it only moves the needle this far, if it's only dropping one of the dominoes in the chain, it's just not going to get it done. So in my opinion, it really does take a domino effect. You've got to have something that starts and causes a reaction. And when that happens, I think that's when we can start seeing, wider change and transition across the industry.
Yeah, I was hoping that somehow we could take these grants or offsets to put towards the risk factor of that, in order to be one of the solutions, right?
Right.
Another solution I wonder about is when you look at value-added crops such as non-GMO corn, non-GMO beans. Okay, so when I plant non-GMO beans, I can consistently get at minimum $2 premium, right?
Sure.
Up to $5 premium, depending on the variety and what it is. But when I go into the market to get crop insurance on those acres, it is futures
Monument.
price times yield. There is no, in this year, let's say at $10 beans, $2 premium, that's a 20% revenue add on for that premium. Okay. So I automatically have to yield, if you will, 20% less than someone else in order for the payment to kick in. How can we get those premiums? And I'm sure this probably applies to white corn producers that are trading based off the board, or blue corn, all of those kind of things. How can we make that solution happen and stick?
In some situations, farmers do have, I'll just say, a solid enough agent that understands the policies well enough and are willing to spend a little bit more time on your policy. You can actually work the contract price of some of these products into policies, which is big and it's really good news. But a lot of folks don't function in that manner. If it's a written agreement, for example, again, administrative time, getting those approved. I mean, that's just all part of there are some administrative loopholes in the system too that just make things difficult to accomplish. So that's one. If we can flatten out that a little bit, it might move the needle a lot. But yeah, since there's so much variability across what a contract might look like, what a value added product might look like, that's kind of when the whole farm revenue protection was ushered in. It's because, like, hey, we need a product that's going to cover a big variety, a big diverse, income pool. And of course, we have about 2,000 policies a year that are taken out on those. So that just kind of shows that it's not the silver bullet that it was meant to be. It also hasn't really changed a great deal since its inception. So just taking a step back, evaluating where the industry is and what it needs. I mean, that has to be done here in the pretty near future, for some of these opportunities to move forward.
So how do we, and how else, what are good solutions to address, a yield only focus versus a soil quality focus? Because I do believe there is a trade-off in tons of soil versus yield. And how do we integrate that? Because essentially, as soil degrades, we introduce more and more variability, more and more risk, which then requires more insurance claims to
Sure.
to make that work. Right? It's kind of a degrading spiral. How can we switch that? What's the solution to switch that to have a focus on soil quality? Is it going to be practice based? Is it going to be site specific measuring? How can that be introduced in the future?
I think the site specific approach is needed drastically, especially with the data and digitization and stuff. We can see much more than we did 10 years ago. And if you compare that to where we were 50 years ago, it's a substantial difference. So we need to take steps in that direction. But again, with the margin costs that farmers are facing right now, it's really hard to afford the tools and resources to accomplish, those data feeds. So what can we be doing to helping farmers understand and afford these tools and resources? I think that would be pretty critical. Something else that we have to keep in mind is innovation has also kind of, when we talk about genetics, especially, has really evolved towards, it's evolved with the health of the soil. So I always like to look at, like, if I have a seed corn from 50 years ago, I would like to plant it today versus what it looked like back then, because I can assure you the performance would be quite different. It's the innovation is such a huge piece here that a lot of folks don't realize. What our genetics and seed can do today is just incredible. But you also have to realize that those were bred for a specific system functioning this way. So unfortunately, often when you employ some of these different alternative practices, that seed does not, perform the same way. So we need the seed genetics to also catch up on the regenerative and the non-GM front as well. And when we start investing in things like that, again, moving the needle, every little bit makes a big difference. But I think that's a big component that we don't think about nearly enough.
It would be interesting to see how an old Missouri 17 would, perform instead of in hill drop at 12,000 to acre. It'd be with a precision planter, planted on 30-inch just to see what it could do. It'd be really interesting, wouldn't it?
It would be something else, that's for sure. Yeah, and I mean, you just think about soil health. I mean, compaction. I love talking about compaction because, again, for how long did we not talk about it? Just turn dirt, turn dirt, turn dirt, leave bare soil out there. Compaction's big. Whether you're talking about water infiltration or microbial health or whatever it is, you see it. It's catching up with us frequently. I mean, I can go out there and probe soil, and some days I can't even get a probe in the ground. That should be very eye opening for producers. So we just need to keep talking about all the living ecosystem that's beneath our feet. And I think when you start talking about biological products as well, if your soil is not in a place to where it can fully harness and leverage their potential, they may not perform well. And you have a lot of farmers that are like very variable performance. Well, I would really like to compare that variable performance with you know production history, how we've been treating the soil, maybe even a yield map, because you take most farmers out in the field, say granddad's been farming this piece for 50 years. He can go out and show you every square inch of that farm that is better or worse than the other. And if you look at that soil, that's going to be a huge reason why it differs. So, unleash the tools and let the farmers run with it. I think that's big. We'll get there. We'll get there. It might take some hiccups and hard times, but I think we have the tech to make it happen.
So let's say you've been put in charge. You've been appointed by the current administration, and you are to write the new farm bill.
Oh boy.
You alone. you are the king of the farm bill, and especially as you referenced with the Maha movement having influence too. What does it look like? How do you build that risk in? Because at the end of the day, your employer is pretty interested in farm risk, right? Because they like to
Sure.
get repaid on those operating
Absolutely.
notes and those land payments and those machinery payments. Rabobank lends money to get it back, not just to be a charity, right? So,
Absolutely.
minimizing risk in an operation's key. So here you are, you're writing the farm bill. What does it look like?
Well, I am going to chase down, more that innovation front. I will be pushing as hard as I can to chase down more funds to support broader innovation, not just where we are today, but where we want to go and where we need to go. So I think that's pretty critical. Do more to help farmers understand exactly, we talk about soil health all the time, but until you actually apply it, that's when you really notice the difference. So what can we do to help farmers actually, deploy some of these, I don't want to say new methods. Some of the best methods we have on the farm today are old, so just differ, alternative. I think alternative is the best phrase to use in that regard. I would push for products that would level the playing field from a crop insurance perspective. And I think the on-farm trialing is a big thing that would support that. And I think the big thing I would push, kind of my motto on it, is like, U.S. agriculture is sexy. We have the best farmers and ranchers in the world right here. Why are we not doing more to promote the products that they're producing? Why are we importing? I'll bring a good example. Some years we import 75% of our organic soybean demand. I think that's a smack in the face to U.S. farmers, because that's value that many could leverage. Be it, I'm not going to say our domestic restrictions and qualifications are the thing holding it back. There's some things happening with imports that I'm not going to get too much into, but
That's what I'm smiling and laughing about here.
it's
The reason we're importing 75% is because they can lie about it somewhere else and send it to us,
and that
where we have
happens
to be down.
frequently. Yeah. So it's like, you know, a lot of folks, people have different opinions of country of origin labeling. Regardless of what your opinion is, what the U.S. producer can do is incredible. We need to build that back up. We need to make consumers want U.S. produced goods. And when those markets open up, again, 100 out of 99 times, a farmer will chase what is economically beneficial for them. And not only does that market have to be there, there has to be a scale to serve that market. Well, we have a lot of farmers who would probably willing to serve the markets, if they were there, if they were beautiful, I mean, and they can be there. We need to cater to them a little bit more. We need to help the consumer understand that what's happening here is great. And then, yeah, I would hope that if it was a government-led initiative, that would encourage, these farm safety net programs to adapt and evolve with the needs of those marketing opportunities.
And why are we exporting all this feed for, other countries to raise animals in their own? Why don't we send them the animals? Why don't we send them the meat? We've got amazing technology and production capabilities that can far outpace our higher labor standards. So, there's just a lot of why do we just let things happen?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely, absolutely.
um,
Yeah,
okay, so you've written in better market development. If I The new farm bill here, according to Eric Gibson, is better marketing and just realizing selling. America is great products to match the levels and be competitive in the agricultural space. Risk management products help farmers deploy new methods. I think there needs to be a new initiative at that, right?
sure.
That essentially came out with FDR, and it shortly thereafter was effective, and it's just kind of gotten into the bureaucratic swamp, right? We need to kind of refocus that again, and broader innovation. Looking at innovating and supporting more than the king commodities. Anything else you're going to write in there too?
So many things, so little time though. No, I mean, I think there's room for the quality conversation too. And again, not to knock on
That's
commodity
something.
products
Hey,
or
that's
whatnot, but
something that we are better at than anywhere in the world is the quality, especially of protein.
absolutely, absolutely, and that
Hey,
it's we can chase that. And again, we have the technology to make it happen, and you could deploy it fairly quickly to scale it to the markets that are demanding it. And we just that first step's got to happen. Unfortunately, we never know what the first step is to get it done. So maybe that's what else I would do. I would create a task force with hoping to understand what it would take the consumer and the food companies and the entire value chain to get it done, because it would need to be a priority.
see what happens, folks, when you give an analyst an opportunity to go wild. They do. They do go wild.
We overthink just about everything twice.
Well, there you go. Now, what about nutrient density and how this plays into everything? Because there's correlations between soil quality and nutrient density
Sure.
of the crop or produce that we're creating. Is that another way for this essentially a bottom up driven pull to improve soil quality? And then all of a sudden, it's a paradigm shattering thing to where who cares about, the risk management goes away because the person who's growing high quality doesn't have to have the yield because he's getting paid on the quality first, the
Sure.
pounds second. Is there any hope or any legs to those kind of arguments or thoughts?
I would certainly think so. Especially, I myself, I grew up producing beef. I am a fan of animal protein. That's my favorite everything for the most part. But I was hoping as some of the alternative protein trends were heating up, hey, this could be an opportunity for producers to grow more value added products based upon a nutritional composition. Well, it seems like thus far the majority of the alternative foods are not I they don't look very healthy. The amount of sodium and other things that are in a lot of them, it doesn't seem like they're really chasing a nutritional quality aspect, which was unfortunate to say the least. But yeah, I mean, I've seen a number of studies. I've seen a lot of companies that are really pushing that. Hey, our regenerative produced product. You look at two different kinds of chicken, and they look completely different, and that is appealing to the consumer when they understand what those differences. Now, maybe that difference is because the breed's different. Maybe it's different because the feed is different. Maybe it's different because the soil health of that food was different. But whatever it is, it's you're comparing A and B. So whatever it takes to help the person paying the bill for that product to understand the difference. That's again where we have to hit home. And it's at some point we have to put a value on those differences. And JFK said it best, farmers the only one that buy retail, sell wholesale, and pay shipping both ways. I don't think that could ever be more true. And as long as farmers are not a price setter. Now, again, if you're selling a really, niche premium product, you can set your price. And I applaud everyone that's figured that out. I think that's awesome. I know a lot of folks that do it themselves, and that's great. I hope I can do it sometime soon. But yeah, the price setting conversation is really tough to tackle.
Mhm.
So, you know, as my biggest fear is that farmers are going to start transitioning and we're going to have widespread regenerative farming across the United States. And then we're still going to be in the back seat when it comes to setting those
Mhm.
prices.
Yeah.
I think
That's
everyone,
what we're best at. We're
yeah,
best at we're best at overproducing and running prices to nothing. I mean,
yeah.
we get a gold star for that, right? Oh shoot. So, tell me this. What's next on the horizon? What are you analyzing next and that can contribute to this conversation and encourage adoption of better soil health and regenerative ag practices?
Yeah, so that survey you referenced, we actually had a round two that finished up a handful of weeks ago. So we'll be synthesizing the results on that. And again, my personal message, connecting the dots from the farmer to the downstream. I'm very hopeful that the insights from that can help, food companies, fuel companies, whomever it is, better understand what the farmers are facing, what they're understanding, so that some of these programs they are working on is truly is taking into consideration where farmers are at. We're going to be diving into that pretty hard, and then we have a few other projects that we're focused on. I'm really eager to work on one that's focused on the economics of sustainable practices and soil health. We're still at the beginning stages of that project, but I think if you're a farmer, every conversation at the beginning of it, economics has to come into play, you know? So not only do they need to make sure it pencils for them, well, at some point, the downstream is going to have to understand, like, hey, this has to pencil for them. So giving them more tools to understand, hey, you want farmers to reduce their nitrogen 15%? Okay. In the current system, this is what it looks like to them. Here's how you can help them adjust, get them across that finish line. That's really critical. And, some of my colleagues and I are really looking forward to diving into that.
I think it's good to remember that functions a lot like an annuity. It has a principal amount and it pays over time. The problem is it's decades that it's paying over, right? That we
Sure.
don't see that we're taking the principal away.
Yeah.
And when the principal's gone on an annuity, we don't, yeah, we're upset and those kind of things, and it's too bad. When the principal's gone on the soil, we starve.
Very
And
true.
I think that we have to develop a system that is not drawing down on the annuity, in fact, is adding to that annuity of the soil every year. But I think when, we're on 2, 4, and 6 year election cycles and we're on quarterly report cycles
Sure.
in corporate ag, it's difficult. And even it's difficult, I think, in farms when we're on generational cycles because you can do a
Sure.
lot. And over a generation, you don't really see it. But boy, I can look back on what happened 3 and 4 generations ago, and it's like, oof, I wish they wouldn't have moldboard plowed that hill. So
Absolutely.
that perspective has a big impact on this, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I can equate every single conversation from a generational perspective, be it something that works or something that didn't work. And again, that's something the downstream doesn't consider. Farming as a legacy, be it your first generation or 10th generation. I think the lifestyle is just so rewarding and it's the best there is. Yeah, the return on investment might be really, really poor some years, but at some point you think about, well, I'm also paying for this lifestyle. It's really hard on this, but we love it. I'm so blessed to grow up around it, and I really can't wait to get my daughters more engraved in it.
Awesome. Any other thoughts while we're together today, Eric?
Nope, just thrilled to have spent the time with you, and I hope this conversation happens again soon.
Yeah, and I hope that you continue as you're talking to farmers, thinking about ways that we can structure risk management around more than just yield. And there's people that say just get rid of it altogether. Boy, that'd be a train wreck. But it does artificially inflate, land values because the land
Sure.
values derive from the revenue. Well, the revenues derive from our quest for yield and maximization without any sort of penalties for, over application or over erosion, those kind of things. The erosion portion is just not enforced. That it's out there, but it's nobody's enforcing. So yeah, I look forward to a future where we can have a farm bill that's good for generations to come.
Yes. Well, we got to hit it together. So I'm always happy to help out when I have the chance.
All right. Well, we'll have you back on when Eric Gibson Farm Bill 2026 is adopted, and you can tell us all the details of the 5,000-page bill that you put together.
I might be able to get by with 4,500. So
Oh, okay, okay. You might get writer's cramp, right? All right, Eric. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate your insights and thoughtfulness. And this report here, is that something when it comes out, we can have a link for listeners?
yep, it is now. We'll make sure we get that sent over so folks can check it out.
Okay. Very good. We'll have a link in the show notes. You can take a look. It's very thoughtful and describes the overall situation and what we can do to get all of our priorities aligned. Thanks, Eric. I appreciate it.